Children Warriors, good morning. It's always good to be with you guys. This is Dre, and this will be our mindset moment. You may have noticed yesterday that I did not put out a video for MLK Day, and a part of that has to do with just a tradition that my dad had taught me when we were younger. And so he basically said no matter what company that he worked for, that he would use one of his paid days off to honor Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. And so, whether or not that company gave him the day or whether he had to use his paid day, he was going to take that day off. And so it's sort of kind of ingrained in me. If we talked to him today, he wouldn't even say, "Oh yeah, I used to tell him to do that." It was just his action, which is a statement within itself. Just that our actions often is what sticks into people. What we say, that's easily forgotten, but what we do and how we live our life, that is where the power is at. So today I owe you two videos, and I'm willing to put that work in, and I'll make sure that we do it because our goal is to have that consistent process where each day we're going to build towards some greatness that we can see, but it's just not there yet. And if you can see a vision without taking action, then you're just dreaming. But if you can see a vision and take action, now we're creating something. So today, when I think of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I did want to just speak on the fact that he is the epitome of what a fearless life looks like, and that many of us have the same abilities within us. We have the same message. We have that same happiness that we're chasing that is tied to greatness, in the sense that if you remember a few videos back, that it is this ability that we have to make the world better around us, to impact the lives of the people that know us, and then extend that a little further. And that each of us kind of have that inside of us because we all genuinely want good if you really, really get down to it. And the problem becomes in the process that we use to take that action. And so, for example, I often joke and use Thanos, but right, Thanos had this idea that there's a lot of suffering in the world, and Thanos from Marvel, if you guys haven't seen, Infinity Wars or Avenger Wars or read the comics, but hopefully there's no spoilers, but if there is, just kind of skip ahead a couple minutes if you haven't seen it yet and you do want to see it. But his overall thought was there's a lot of suffering. I'm going to wipe out half the population of the earth, and will help alleviate a lot of this pain and suffering. That now there will be enough resources for everyone. There's just not enough to go around. We're overpopulated. And so, right, if you jokingly you could say, well, if you have, basically one wish is what you get with this Infinity Gauntlet when you put all the stones together, why not wish for double the resources? Then everybody would be okay, right? Like there's lots of different ways that he could have gone about this, but that comes into play as our personal personalities, what we believe is necessary and what we're willing to do. So Dr. King, he often talks in his speeches about how he just does not fear any man, that he is not worried about anything on this earth, and that his eyes have seen the glory in the coming of the Lord. And when you think about the idea that there is this immediate impact of the decisions that we make, and those are often negative. And so for a lot of us, we don't take the first step because we're really worried about that immediate impact. And Dr. King is letting us know that if you are trying to do something, you're trying to get further than that, then you have to be able to look further than that. And a lot of the times we aren't. We are simply focused on the immediate negative consequence of saying, okay, well, if I take this out of my life, where am I going to live at? How am I going to afford to live? That's my favorite food. What happens with that? If I don't have this job or this income, right? We're worried about the immediate impact. And it's not to say that that should not come into the calculation, right? If you do have some of these things, then you really do have to at least consider them and weigh them. But we often just use those as reasons to not even take action. And so I'm encouraging you guys that when you do realize some of the consequences, that some of them you're going to be able to look at and say, well, that's not the worst thing that can happen, i.e., it's not going to move the bar, it's not going to move the needle too much. So you're going to want to be able to say, okay, well, when this happens, then I'm going to just kind of go with it because it's only going to be a short time. There's other things that you really do want to think deeper about and come up with some sort of plan so that you're able to minimize the impact of those results in your decision. So you do want to, like I remember Steve Harvey talked about living in his car for a bit when he was trying to chase that happiness, and he knew that there was something in him that he was supposed to do stand-up comedy, and he talks about some of the struggles that he faced along the way. And he says if he could go back, that the main thing he would change is that he would have asked for help, and that successful people are very willing to share and impart their knowledge on you. He said, don't ask them for money, so they get a lot of that. but ask them to teach you how to fish, as it were, and just the overall importance of that. And so today, when you're looking at just the way the overall climate is, and even the way that things could be in your company culture or even in your congregation or with your family, Dr. King has a quote that we're going to focus on, another one. And so he says that fear, overall, the fear that we have with each other is because we don't understand each other. And he says that we don't understand each other because we don't talk to each other, right? Like that's really what it comes down to, that we do not communicate with each other. And we're trying to understand, okay, well, what does that, like, how does that look in my life? Well, you'll see a lot of prejudice that is in the world, where people have issues. Even some of the things that I've dealt with personally, people that have been in and out of my life, I can tell you two things that always come to mind when I see someone that has a very negative impression of a black person. And so number one is that they believe that we're extremely violent people, and that so essentially, if you have this belief, then even I would be like, well, I don't want my kids around you, right? Like that's not an unfair statement. The discussion really has to do with, okay, well, if you peel the onion back on the statistics, and I encourage people to just generally go look at that, you'll find that the overall, right, the way I often describe it is, if you remove every single black person in the United States of America, you would still have about somewhere around like 65 to 70%. I think the number is actually closer to maybe like 75, but you'll basically see that the large amount of the issues that people are dealing with, that they don't go away. And so the question then becomes, okay, well, if what you're seeing on a regular basis creates the reality that this is a very common thing, then yes, then that often ends up creating the perception and the issue that you have. And that in this sense, communication has less to do with having a one-to-one discussion with someone, as much as it has to do with fact checking some of the information that you are receiving. And you've probably experienced that even in your corporate environment, where someone has a negative impression of you, and you can't really figure out what happened, right? The person has never had a conversation with you. The person has never experienced anything of your work, and that they are somehow have a very strong opinion that you just can't really figure out where it started. And if you are fortunate enough to have a conversation with that person, because sometimes we're just like, look, dude, I'm too busy to worry about this. But if you do have a conversation with that person, then you find that somewhere along the way, they heard something or misconstrued or misunderstood something. And instead of them talking to you and better understanding the situation, they just said, okay, well, this is gospel, right? Where they just said, this is fact. And then they made decisions based off of that fact. But the misunderstanding is there. And so another often issue that I've seen is they'll share like propaganda. And so what I mean by that is I saw one person in particular. I had actually went to a congregation and we had worship together. He was in the leadership, and I remember getting very upset with him. And he had shared something that basically had a stat that basically said black and black crime is like 80%, and then like white on white crime is like 5%, and black on white crime is like 70% or 90%, like some really high numbers. And you'll see that is a sign that they do not communicate with anyone outside of that little bubble of misinformation that they receive from different hate groups, where they share this stuff, and then you believe that stuff is true. And I was very upset with him, and I went to him and I was like, well, you just did a prayer where you talked about how divisive the world is and how you want the world to be better, and then you're sharing this nonsense on social media. And he was just basically like, look, well, that's true. And so at that time, I used to think that you could influence someone just with facts, that feelings weren't as big of an impact and factor as they are. But I've learned that is not the case. And so what ended up happening is I went to the FBI database and I printed it off and I handed it to him. And he looked at it and he said, well, yeah, this is skewed, right? Because some of the people that are being counted as like white, they're not really white, that they're like either Hispanic or something like that. He said that they were mixing like different groups in there together, which spoke on like a much deeper issue, right? So when I had that conversation, it was very clear to me that this person was essentially too far gone, right? And that's difficult for me to say. Just the optimism that I have, that I genuinely believe that you're able to impact people with facts, figures, with data, and that most people are just misinformed. But I've come to learn that most people are misinformed, but they're like a pig in mud. Like they enjoy their misinformation, that it dramatically impacts their life if they had to accept that that's not true. And you may know someone in that instance where it's easier for them to say, okay, you're the reason that my life sucks, than it is for them to say, this is how I can make my life better, i.e., a lot of this has to do with me. And so that's kind of where we cut that one in half. And then I'll have another video, another episode. We'll talk much deeper into that, because I stayed in that congregation a lot longer than I should have. And a lot of it had to do with my own personal issues with people pleasing. And so the second thing that you will take from MLK's quote is just the idea that when communication breaks down, and that we have misinformation, and that we don't either talk to the person or at least fact check some of the information that we received, that it ends up creating this misconception where we're fearing, where we're worried about some of the issues that are going on outside of us, instead of resolving and understanding them, right? Like the scripture says, you were not given a spirit of fear, you're given a spirit of courage and strength. And so this is kind of where we shift from, when you have this fear, right? First half, you want to understand where the fear comes from. And then the second half, you want to have the strength to take action against it. So in the example I just gave, he did not have the strength and courage to take action against it. And why is that? Well, if you've been living for a certain number of years, a certain number of decades, with this perception that blacks are violent, and that they're taking all of the food stamps, that they're just lazy and all this other stuff, then you most likely have created a circle of friendship of people who share this like mind. And so now, even if you have to face the reality that this may not be true, for a lot of people, it's very difficult for them to take action, because that negatively has a ripple, that negative misconception that they've had has such a ripple in their life, where now they have to figure out, do I still get to hang out with the same people? Right? Do I go and share this information with them? How will they receive that? And a lot of times when we're thinking of the ripple impact, it becomes a lot easier just to keep things the way that they are. And we touched on in the very beginning that things are so difficult in the beginning that the immediate impact is so grave that a lot of us don't take action. That we would rather live a life of a lie, of settling, than the possibility of chasing some happiness while catching greatness, and understanding that if we rise to the challenge, the Achoji journey we are always talking about, that they're on the other end of that we will be stronger, and that we will be greater, we'll be more impactful, and that we would have a ripple effect of positivity. And what I mean is let's say that person went back and he talked to the different people that he gets his propaganda from, and he shares some of the data and some of the facts and figures. Most likely some of them would say, get out of here, I'll never talk to you again. It's just a true statement. That's just kind of the way it is. But a lot of them are going to say, thank you, you have positively impacted me. I would still be walking in a lie if not for you. And so MLK, because he had the strength and the courage, and he didn't have a spirit of fear, he went out every day doing things that a lot of people felt were needed, that a lot of people understood would be necessary to create the change that he wanted to create in the world. But a lot of them said, that's not worth it to me. That the life I have, while it's not perfect, while things could be better in a lot of ways, this is a lot for me. Like, I would rather just work within my small little network, where we talk about how good things could be, or how difficult things are and the reason that they are, but we're not going to take that necessary action to overcome that. And so you do want to understand, at least for me, when I celebrate MLK's legacy, for me it is the idea that he did not allow fear to grip him, and that he was able to focus on the fact that he had a spirit of strength and courage. And so that'll be Mindset Moment. I do encourage you guys to live that Achoji lifestyle, to overcome the immediate risk and understand the long-term benefit of you overcoming the fears, because the fears is not a part of you. It is not a part of that inner drumbeat inside of you. That is stuff that was put in you from society, from the environment you grew up in. These fears are not a part of you. They are just inside of you. And if you overcome them, then you'll be able to unlock the impact that you're trying to create in the world, in your life, and your friend's life, your family's life, and then the life of your community and globally, if that's your goal. So until next time, continue blessings on your journey to become the champion of your dream life.